had always trusted my dad, Darcy. He was the one constant in my life, my rock, the person I could always rely on. But lately something felt off. He had become distant, like there was something eating away at him. And I couldn't quite place what it was. I could feel the change, but it was as if he was shutting me out. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the feeling lingered. I couldn't shake the thought that I was losing him somehow. That evening, I tried to forget about it all. I had plans to go to a party, and I figured it would help me escape the unease. But as I walked out the door, the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach grew stronger. It wasn't just my dad. It felt like the whole world was shifting beneath my feet, and I had no way of stopping it. At the party, the noise of music and laughter surrounded me, but it did little to calm the storm brewing inside me. My phone buzzed repeatedly with calls from my dad. I could feel his disappointment even through the screen. He hated when I stayed out late. But tonight, I wasn't in the mood to talk. I just wanted to block out everything that had been bothering me at home, if only for a few hours. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Why was he acting so strange? Why did it feel like he was slipping away from me? When I finally decided to leave, I made my way home, my thoughts still spiraling. The quiet of the drive gave me too much time to think, and the unease in my chest only deepened. As I pulled into the driveway, something was off right away. The lights in the house were dimmer than usual. I had expected a warm welcome, maybe my dad sitting on the couch, watching TV like always. But tonight, the house felt different, almost like it was holding its breath. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the dark windows. An overwhelming sense of foreboding gripped me, like something was about to happen, something I couldn't predict or prepare for. I grabbed my bag and walked to the door, but the stillness in the air was suffocating. It felt like I wasn't alone, like someone or something was waiting for me inside. When I opened the door, everything seemed normal at first. But then I noticed it. The usual sounds of the house, the hum of the fridge, the soft creak of the floorboards were gone. The silence was thick, almost as if the house itself was holding its breath. I heard a muffled noise coming from the living room, like a conversation or something more intimate. My heart began to race, my body frozen in place. I didn't know what I was about to find, but something urged me to check. Slowly, I moved toward the living room, trying to make as little noise as possible, my breath shallow. What was I about to walk in on? I peeked around the corner and froze. My heart stopped dead in my chest. There, in the living room, was my father, Darcy, the man I had looked up to all my life, the man I thought I knew inside and out. And he wasn't alone. He was with another woman. Their lips met in a kiss, his hands on her in a way that made my stomach churn. The world seemed to collapse around me, and I couldn't breathe. I staggered backward, my mind racing. Was this real? Had I been so blind all this time? My father, the one person I trusted more than anyone, was with someone else. It didn't matter who the woman was. I didn't want to know. The image of them together was burned into my mind, a searing, unshakable image that I couldn't escape. I had thought I knew everything about my dad, about our family, about the life we had built together. But now, in this moment, everything had changed. My stomach twisted, and I felt a wave of nausea hit me. The bond one had always believed in, the trust one had placed in him, felt like it was breaking apart in an instant. I had always believed in the strength of our family, but now it felt like everything I thought I knew had shattered beyond repair. I stood there trembling, my body frozen in shock, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence in the house had become deafening, suffocating. I couldn't bring myself to move, couldn't bring myself to leave. But I couldn't just stand there either. I had to confront him, but how could I? What could I even say? What was there to say? The longer I stood there, the more my emotions spiraled out of control. Anger, hurt, confusion, betrayal. The questions rushed in. Who was she? Why was he doing this? Did he even care about me anymore? I felt the hot sting of tears behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. I needed answers. I couldn't just let this moment define everything I thought I knew about my father. But how could I forgive him? How could I ever forget this? The pain in my chest was unbearable. The house felt colder now, emptier. It was like I was suffocating in this reality I didn't understand. I wanted to leave, to run away from the hurt, from the betrayal, from the man I thought I knew. But I couldn't. I had to face him. I had to know why. I needed to understand what had driven him to do this. With a shaky breath, I walked toward the living room, forcing my legs to move even though every part of me wanted to turn and run. I gripped the doorframe as I stepped inside, my heart hammering in my chest like it might explode. Darcy looked up, his face draining of color when he saw me standing there. The woman beside him mirrored his shock, but there was no denying the truth now. There was no hiding. Lydia. My father's voice cracked as he scrambled to stand, fumbling with his clothes. This isn't what you think. The anger surged up inside me, and my voice trembled with hurt. What is it then, Dad? I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my words. What exactly is this? Because it looks like you've been lying to me all this time. I thought you were the one person I could trust. The one person who would never hurt me. His face softened for a moment, almost as if the man I knew was peeking through. But it was fleeting. He looked down at the woman and then back at me, guilt flooding his expression. I never meant to hurt you, Lydia, he said softly, his voice filled with regret. I've been struggling since your mother passed, and I didn't know how to cope. This woman, she's been here for me when I needed someone. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I wanted to scream, to throw something, anything, to make him feel the depth of the hurt he had caused. But all I could do was stand there, unable to process the weight of his words. So this is your solution? Betraying me? Betraying everything we had? The words felt like they were being torn from my chest. Darcy looked away, his eyes filled with guilt. But it didn't change anything. I didn't know how to handle it. I was just lost. I shook my head, disbelief and anger mixing in my blood. You think that makes it okay? You think I can just forgive this? You think I can forget what you've done? I wiped away the tears that finally spilled down my cheeks, but they came faster, and I couldn't stop them. How could I ever look at him the same again? How could I ever trust him again after this? I had always trusted my father more than anyone. He was my anchor, my rock. The one person I believed would never let me down. But now, in this agonizing moment, everything I thought I knew about him had been ripped away. He wasn't the man I'd loved all my life. That man was gone, replaced by a stranger whose betrayal was so deep it left me gasping for air. The woman, still standing silently beside him, stepped forward, as if to offer some sort of comfort or explanation. But I didn't want to hear it. I didn't care about her reasons or her side of the story. She had no place in my life, no right to invade the bond my father and I had shared for so long. I could feel the heat of humiliation rising in my chest, burning away whatever remained of the trust one once held so dear. Without another word, I turned away, unable to face either of them. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to leave, to run far away from this cruel reality that had shattered everything I knew. I couldn't stand to be in that house, to breathe the same air as him. He wasn't mine anymore. He had broken that bond. I grabbed my bag and made my way to the door, Darcy's voice calling my name behind me. His words were filled with regret, but they fell on deaf ears. The damage was done, and nothing could undo the destruction he had caused. I walked out, my feet carrying me away from everything I once held sacred. The cold night air slapped against my face, but I couldn't feel it. My mind was a blur, swirling with questions I didn't know how to answer. How could he do this? How could he betray me like this? The anger inside me bubbled up again, fierce and consuming. But there was something else, something gnawing at me, a hollow ache deep in my chest. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was about the lies, the broken trust. My father, the one person I had always believed would never turn his back on me, had done exactly that. I tried to call my best friend, desperate for some kind of support, but the call went straight to voicemail. The realization hit me hard. I couldn't talk to anyone about this. Not yet. How could I explain this utter devastation that had torn my world apart? I didn't know where to go, or even if I wanted to. The betrayal had cut so deeply that I wasn't sure I could ever trust anyone again. I kept walking, my thoughts spinning in a vortex of confusion and anger. What had drawn him to her? What was it about this woman that made him forget everything we had? He had always been so careful, so measured in his decisions. He wasn't the type to act impulsively. So why? Why now? Why after all the years of devotion to me? The questions burned, but I couldn't make sense of it. And that more than anything frustrated me. I wanted an answer. Something concrete to hold on to. Something that could help me make sense of this unthinkable betrayal. But all I had was a painful void. A gnawing emptiness in my heart that refused to be filled. I eventually found myself at the park, sitting on a bench, staring at nothing in particular. The world around me continued as though nothing had changed. People walked by, chatting and laughing, completely unaware of the storm that raged inside me. It felt surreal, like I was trapped in a parallel universe where nothing made sense. How could the world keep turning when mine had come to a crashing halt? I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to breathe through the pain, trying to find some semblance of peace. But it was impossible. I knew I couldn't keep running from this. But I didn't know where to go or what to do next. Part of me wanted to go back home, to demand answers from my father, to look him in the eye and make him explain himself. But another part of me feared what I would find. I was terrified of facing him again. As I closed my eyes, trying to focus on the steady rise and fall of my chest, all I could see was him, standing there with her, holding her the way he had once held me. It consumed me, poisoning every thought. I hated it. I hated how weak I felt, how powerless I was to stop this train wreck from unfolding. Then, as if the universe were mocking me, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my dad. "Lydia, please, can we talk? I never meant to hurt you." The words flickered across the screen, and I froze, my heart beating wildly in my chest. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to block him out, to erase him from my life entirely. But another part, the part that still loved him, the part that still clung to the hope that he could be the father I once knew, wanted to hear him out. I wanted to believe him, to hear him say it was all a mistake, that I was still his little girl, the one he would never betray. But deep down I knew the man who had sent me that message wasn't the same man who had raised me. That man was gone, and this new version of him, the one who had caused me so much pain, was someone I couldn't recognize. With trembling hands, I deleted the message without replying. The decision was final. There would be no going back. The truth had been laid bare before me, and I couldn't unsee it. My father had made his choice, and now I had to make mine. And right now, that choice was to walk away, to let go of the man I thought I knew, even though it felt like my heart was being ripped in two. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one a fog of grief and confusion. I couldn't escape the weight of what had happened, the truth that now lived inside me like an open wound. I couldn't look at my father without seeing the betrayal in his eyes. Each time I woke up, the first thought that hit me was that he, the man I had once trusted above all others, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. The shock had worn off, but the pain remained like a constant ache in my chest. I felt like a different person. Everywhere I went, every conversation I had, everything was tainted by what I knew now. I couldn't shake the image of him with her, the way he had held her, the way he had turned his back on me. I wondered if I would ever trust anyone again, if I could ever heal from this. The man I had once called my father was gone, and I didn't know how to move forward without him. I could barely recognize myself anymore. How could I go on pretending that everything was normal when my world had been completely upended? I tried to keep busy, to distract myself from the gnawing pain, but it was impossible. The house felt like a hollow shell without him. His absence was a void that consumed everything. Each room empty of its former warmth, every corner echoing with the silence of a presence that used to be constant. And every time I passed the living room, I couldn't help but remember that night, the night everything changed. It was a wound that kept reopening, each memory sharper than the last, each thought more painful than the one before. One evening, as I sat alone in my room, staring at the blank walls, another message from him appeared on my phone. It was short, simple, and raw. "I'm sorry, Lydia. I know I've hurt you, but I'm still your father. I love you." I stared at the words for what felt like an eternity, my heart torn between the love I still carried for him and the rage that had taken root in me. He thought an apology could erase the hurt, that it could somehow make everything right again. But it couldn't. It wasn't enough. I couldn't respond. How could I? How could I ever look at him the same way, knowing what I now knew? The betrayal wasn't just the affair itself. It was the years of lies, the deception he'd spun to conceal his actions. The man I thought I knew had hidden his true self from me, and everything I had believed in had been shattered. The pain was overwhelming, yes, but it was more than just the betrayal. It was the realization that I had been utterly alone in my grief. I could no longer turn to him for comfort, no longer find solace in his reassuring words. The one person who was supposed to be my protector, my rock, had now become the source of my deepest pain. And now, I had no one to turn to, no one who could understand what I was going through. I spent days avoiding his calls, ignoring his messages, desperate to distance myself from the chaos he had unleashed. But no matter how hard I tried to escape it, the truth was always there, lurking in the background like a constant hum in my ears. It was impossible to ignore. Eventually, I reached a breaking point. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay, couldn't keep hiding from the truth. I had to confront him. I had to hear him out, even if it hurt. Maybe I didn't want to, but deep down, I knew I needed closure. I needed to face him, even if it meant tearing my heart apart further. So I called him. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity, before he finally picked up. Lydia. His voice was tentative, almost afraid, as though he wasn't sure what kind of reception he'd receive. To be honest, neither was I. I need to know, I said, my voice trembling, betraying the raw emotion I was struggling to keep in check. Why? Why her? Why did you do this to me? There was a long silence on the other end, and when he finally spoke, his words were laden with regret. Lydia, I never wanted to hurt you. You have to understand, I was lost, I was grieving, and I made a mistake. It wasn't supposed to go this far, but I didn't know how to handle everything. I was broken. I could hear the sincerity in his voice, but it didn't matter. His words, no matter how heartfelt, couldn't undo the damage he had caused. The trust that had once existed between us was gone, shattered beyond repair. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said, each word bitter and heavy, like it was physically painful to say. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I understand, he replied softly, the weight of his voice a painful echo of the man I once knew. But I'm here whenever you're ready. I ended the call without saying another word. I wasn't ready, and I didn't know if I ever would be. The trust, the bond that had once defined our relationship was gone, and nothing could bring it back. I had made my decision, and I had to stand by it. The pieces of my life, carefully built over the years, were now scattered, and I had no idea how to put them back together. For the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly alone. I couldn't turn to him anymore, and I wasn't sure who else I could rely on. The man I had once looked up to, the man who had been my father, was now a stranger to me. And as much as it pained me to admit it, I knew I had to let him go. I couldn't keep holding on to something that no longer existed. I had to find my own way forward, without him. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But eventually, I realized that I could survive without him. I could rebuild myself piece by piece, and find the strength to move on. The betrayal had taken so much from me, but I wouldn't let it take everything. I wouldn't let it define me. I had to let go of the past, the man he was, the father I had once known, and embrace whatever future lay ahead, even if that future meant doing it alone. As painful as that thought was, it was the only way to heal. I had to find a new path, one where I could stand on my own, and no longer be bound by the pain of what had been lost.